Welcome to the next in our series on internet and general technology, safety, physical, ruchnius, gashmius, how we keep ourselves and our families, our children safe and dealing appropriately with the challenges posed by technology. So this week we will be dealing with some further chinuch issues that are relevant, that are very specifically relevant. Again, we could spend, forever talking about chinuch in general, but there are a few areas that I think really need specific focus in terms of chinuch, in terms of how we approach life, etc., that are very, very valid and relevant to the challenges posed by technology. Okay, the first thing that I really is extremely important is, and this is very general, but it's something that I see a tremendous amount in dealing in the technology space, and that is the analog, what we call in the computer design and security space. We talk about a security first design mindset. In other words, when you design a product, when you design a program, you don't design and then say, oh, how do I make this secure? You put security needs into the design of the product from the get-go, and you get much better results that way. Now, how does that work? What do I mean when I say the analog of that? I mean a ruchnius, a frumkeit, a halacha first approach to life. So let's take a non-technology example to start with, right? And this is a scenario that I've seen many times. I'm chatting with somebody and they'll say, oh, we're going to Florida for a vacation. We're going to this, the Florida Keys. And do you by any chance happen to know of a place where my husband can find a minyan on Shabbos? So what's the problem here? They're they want a minyan, they're going to take kosher food with them, whatever. The problem is that they decided to go to the Florida Keys, and now they're trying to figure out how to bolt on the the bits and pieces of the minyan, etc. Instead of thinking, when you're deciding, where am I going? We want to go for a vacation. We've been stressed out. It's been a hard time. It's been a hard couple months, whatever the reason. I just want to have a good time, whatever it is, right? So you want to go for a vacation. Where should we go? And in choosing where to go, you think about, where's the weather? Where's there places you want things to see, things to do, whatever. And part of the criteria is there a minyan? Will I be able to get kosher food easily? Or, if it's only for a few days, will I bring with me? Fine. But these things should be part of the original planning. Where am I going? Part of my choice depends on whether I can get a minyan, whether, kosher food, are the places that I want to go, places that are for a firm person to go. If you're going to many parts of Florida, the big attraction, say, is the beaches. Are the beaches really where you want to be or not, et cetera, et cetera? I'm not saying don't go to Florida. I'm just making the point that when you're thinking about that vacation, you should be thinking about all of those things up front. Okay. The analog on the technology space, there are many analogs, but there are a couple of major issues to think about. Number one is when you are making general decisions about technology. So am I going to get a smartphone? Am I going to get, internet access to the house, a new computer, a big computer, a tablet, this, that, the other, right? So you shouldn't say, okay, what's my budget for a phone? I spend my budget for a phone. And then I'm like, oh, now how do I secure the phone? And I don't have a budget for securing the phone because I spent all of my budget on the phone, right? Instead, you think, okay, what's my budget for all of the things that I need for a good experience with the phone? And included in that experience is the size of the screen, how fast it is, blah, 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 etc. And one of those things is the security app that I'm going to use, right? And think about that before you buy the phone. So okay, and again, depending on, you're going to do it yourself, you're going to go to Tag, whatever, and build that into your budget. Otherwise, you find yourself in a very difficult position. It's not just phones; it just happens to be a current thing. Same thing, when you're looking at, say, internet access. I know people who just have decided to use, cell data, which is more expensive, but they decided that that's the best way for them to ensure that their kids can't get on the internet when they're not around, because they literally take the cell radio, they take the unit with them, and the kids can't get it, etc. Right? That's not everybody's going to do that, but the point is that your decision about how you're going to get internet access in the house should take that into consideration in the first place. Now, for me, I'm like, I'd rather have a regular, stable internet connection, but every computer in my house has a filter on it. That's just part of, getting a computer is getting a filter, setting it up, et cetera, et cetera. And that's just the way it rolls. It's extremely important when you're making these technology decisions to think from the get-go, how are you going to set this up in a way that's consonant with your values as a frum person? Okay, so the same thing is, are you going to get onto social media, or are you not going to get onto social media? You're getting onto social media, what groups, say Facebook, what groups are you going to get on? On what are you going to post, right? You need to think about all of this stuff before you start doing stuff. You don't start posting and think, oh my goodness, why did I do this, right? I mean, okay, we all make mistakes, but again, if you think about it in the first place, before you get into it, you're going to make fewer mistakes. And the mistakes that you make are less likely to be more severe. They're more likely to be less severe because you've set yourself up by thinking about it in the first place. You've set yourself up to doing things in a better way. And, using that kind of mentality, by the way, also helps avoid, again, other kinds of problems. That's why I'm saying it's the analog to the security first mindset. These ideas have to be baked in to your decision-making process from the get-go, from the beginnings. If there's one thing that people come out of this session, that's the single most important thing, because it applies to everything, whether you're concerned about tznius, about ehrlichkeit, about anything, right? Planning, thinking about how you protect yourself from the get-go is going to get you a lot further than if you try to bolt these issues on afterwards. Now, obviously, if you made your decisions and then thought of it, obviously deal with it then. But to the extent possible, try to always keep this thing in mind. Okay. Now, there are a couple of really big areas where there are challenges. And again, it's all going to fine to talk about technology, but we have to understand what is going on before we can protect ourselves or recognize that this thing that we are thinking of doing or looking at, etc., is going to present a problem. So the first thing is tznius. And one of the reasons that we run into problems is because a lot of the focus with tznius is things like, okay, what am I wearing? Is my skirt long enough? Are my sleeves long enough? Is, the shirt too tight? But all the other, now these are obviously important things, but there's a lot more to tznius than that. Okay, so there is the concept of hatznei lechas, right? So when you get on social media, etc., what are you posting? What are you posting? Who are you following? Because who you choose to follow, what you post, both are each one is one side of the concept of hatznei lechas and of showing off, of sticking your nose where it doesn't belong, frankly, right? I mean, there's a concept. There's a concept in halacha of hezek re'iyah, right? You're not allowed to look into somebody else's windows. That's the whole concept of matay v'alecha, right? That we don't look into other people's doorways. We set our doors in such a way so that you can't see easily into the other person's space. That's part of tznius also. Not showing up, not showing off, not showing off, right? Not boasting about things, sometimes you need to publicize things, right? But on the other hand, being into showing off, performing for people, etc. This is not a good way. Now, and it's really important to really, really get that into yourself, because in general technology, but social media especially, encourages, that's what it's designed for, to display as much as possible, to share as much as possible. And there are a lot of good things about it. but there has to be a very strong limit. And we need to learn that limit not after we get online. This has to start, from day one, before your kids ever get online, before they ever get a smartphone. And we as adults need to constantly keep, think about that, remind ourselves of that. Hatznei leches, tznius is not just about, okay, so I'm wearing a perfectly tzniustic outfit so I can take 60 pictures of myself and post them to myself. That's not quite what it is. That's not really how things are supposed to be. Okay. So again, it's not that we are never allowed to show ourselves, but we have to understand how far that should go and how far that can go, both in terms of what we show of ourselves and what we look of others. Okay. The whole influencer economy is dependent on people sharing really intimate parts of their lives very often. And as a frum person, I mean, it makes me uncomfortable on a personal level, but as a frum person, I think of it as a really problematic thing. I remember a while ago reading, one of these Ask the Rebbitzin type columns, and this was specifically, Rebbitzin, a shakhadas type of thing. And somebody writes about how he went out with this girl. She seemed really nice, whatever. But even on their dates, she kept on pausing things to take pictures to post on her Instagram because her main parnasa is tied to being an influencer. And she's so into this being an influencer that she has to share everything, including the details of the date she's going up on. That's incredibly unsneaks. And the problem, so, this buffer was very troubled by it. And he's writing to the Rebbitzin like, is it me or is it her? Right. And to me, it's troubling that she's doing this and that he's not even sure that his instinct to say fair is, he's not sure that instinct is right. Maybe he's being too frummy, too uptight, whatever. But that's a really big fail of tznius. So this is the kind of thing that we need, again, to keep on inculcating in ourselves, reminding ourselves, not everything has to be displayed to everybody. Not everything has to be shared with the world. Some things are meant to be shared. Some things don't have to be shared, but it's okay to share them. But not everything. And, it's really, really important that when we think about tznius, it's not just about, the particular, whether the picture lines up with, okay, are the knees covered, are the elbows covered, et cetera, but is this something that belongs outside of your Dalet Amas, et cetera. So this is really, really a very, very important, thing. And it shows up in so many different ways. And we need to be really thoughtful about it when we, whether it's posting pictures of your kids, even of your simchas, right? Like if you're posting pictures of a small simcha, where are you posting it, right? Are you posting it to your family chat, which is nice, the cousins want to see, your the l'chaim, whatever, or are you posting it for the whole wide world to see? And I'm like, really? Does everybody have to see like all the fancy dishes at your time or whatever it is? Again, I'm not trying to come down on people, but it's the kind of thing you really need to think about in general. Like, what am I posting? What am I following? And what am I sharing? Very, very important. Another thing that's really important is the concept of inner bereshit. What I mean, impulse control. Again, most technology, not most, but a very, very significant segment of technology, and especially, again, social media, online shopping, etc., is designed to draw you in, to get you to do things without thinking about it too much. And if you ever hear the term friction or removing friction, that's what it's about, right? It's about making us just do this, making it easy to take that picture and share it. We get online and we just, oh, it looks so great, it looks so cheap, buy it without really thinking it through. And, obviously the people who are doing this, trying to draw us in, have their din v'chesh with it. But we, as the people consuming this stuff, as people doing these things, we need to teach ourselves about, you have to think about, do I really want to buy this? Do I really need to post this? Do I really need to do this thing? What's the really good upside and what's the real potential downside of this. Okay, again, keep in mind that there are ways to make it easier to do this, and I will talk about that in a future I will talk about it in a future session. But the bottom line is we need to think about this in the first place. Like, what's the upside? What's the downside? Is, what's the likely result of this thing happening? Okay. So, and it doesn't start, you turn 18 and suddenly you learn to think ahead, right? It starts when our kids are young and, they make mistakes and they don't make mistakes, et cetera, et cetera. YouTube is not working. Let us give a look at that. In fact, I know it's up. And what it doesn't have is the blur. Hold on a second. Let me check something. Sorry, guys, there's a technical glitch here and I'm trying to troubleshoot it. Okay, I hope that the YouTube is coming up for people now. Huh, what just happened here? Anyway, I hope that the glitch resolved itself. I will be continuing. Anyway, so what I was saying is about the concept of Enev Berosha. You need to teach, and always for yourself as well, work on that midah of thinking things through, even in a little way. Every little bit matters. Every little bit counts, because again, it's very easy to just like get swept along, and then suddenly you find yourself in the middle of something that just does not make a lot of sense. Okay. Another really big thing, and I see this coming up a lot, is Shmiras Halashon. And I'm not just talking about this Lashon. There's Achilas, Lashon Hara, Motzi Shemra, and Anas Devarim. It's a whole broad range of things. And there are two related issues. One is just the halachas. It is shocking to me how often people do things that are simply not halachically correct, and when you call them on it, they did not realize that this is usher, or that it might be usher, and maybe, and if it might be usher, unless you have a really, really good reason to do it, like, don't until you find out. And then there's the issue of, is this in the spirit of Shmiras Halashon? In other words, there are certain things that are technically, halachically not considered achilas because, certain technical rules, but it doesn't mean you have to share it, because it's still, the concept still applies. In other words, what's, Mekadosh Atzmacha b'mutalach really, really applies to Shmiras Halashon. You may be permitted to say this thing, but do you really, really need to? But again, it's very hard to really think about that if you are not really very familiar, very strongly like imbued with the concept of Shmiras Halashon, all the concepts of Shmiras Halashon. I'll give you an example of a story. And by the way, I'm mostly using like high-profile, very public stories because, I don't want to take a chance that I'm going to accidentally, tell a story about somebody that somebody's going to recognize or whatever. And, I also don't want to talk about Shmiras Halashon. I don't want to say things about people that, don't need to be said in public if I can avoid it. Okay. Anyway, so this was, I was reading a pretty good article, one of the From publications, about the concept of misinformation, disinformation, whatever. It was actually a pretty good article. But then they have like a story about somebody and how you have to be so careful with social media. And the real problem, I mean, obviously, yes, social media was a player here, and I'll explain, but the real problem was so many people did not think through the concept of Shmiras Halashon. And then somebody also didn't, we talked about last week about critical thinking, didn't stop and say, hey, this makes no sense. So what happened was, this guy davens in a shul that has all sorts of chassidisha, litvisha, whatever, all sorts and types, and it generally, that makes no difference to who goes to the Amud. So one day somebody posts a story to Facebook about how somebody got up to daven for the Amud. I believe he was chiyuv, and somebody supposedly yelled at him, how could you go up there? You didn't go to mikveh today. And it was a very ugly scene, et cetera, et cetera. And it went, a bunch of people posted it and reposted it and liked it and forwarded and whatever on Facebook. And the younger man who's telling the story said he got 2 phone calls about this terrible thing that supposedly happened in shul. And after the second phone call, he got really upset and he called up his Rav, and the Rav said, Reb Yid, you were in shul this morning, weren't you? Okay. The first big problem is that somebody was Maitzilaz. Right? What makes you think that it's okay to do that? What makes you think it's okay to post a story that never happened? Social media or not, like, how do you do that? That's wrong. That's alpi din. There is absolutely no excuse for it. Okay. Then all of the people who reposted it and shared it and called him or whatever, right? Again, I don't know the halacha here, because it could be that because it's on a very public forum, that it is no longer considered something that you're not allowed to repeat, because something that is said or done in a public forum, the halachas of Achilles and don't apply as much. But if you're thinking in terms of, but what is the lesson here of Shmiras Halashon, right? Is not everything that you see or hear needs to be repeated. And if you are going to repeat something that is negative, there should be a reason. There should be a te'elis for it. Okay? So even if al pi halacha it was okay to repeat it, which in this case it wasn't, because it was actually not true. So it's not okay la halacha to repeat a lie, even if it was said in public. Okay? But even if you believed it was true, what was the point of repeating this story? And all of the people who repeated the story, the person who posted it originally, all the people who repeated the story, if they had been thinking in terms of Shmiras Halashon, the story would have gone nowhere. A, it wouldn't have been posted, and B, even if it had been posted, it wouldn't have gone anywhere. So, at the end point, you have a person who didn't stop to think, I was in shul and I know that this didn't happen, and he just, reacted without thinking about it. So that goes back to the idea of, getting used to stopping and thinking. But, the fundamental problem in this particular story was that some people did not stop to think that there is a halachic problem, and that even if there's not a halachic problem, there's a hashkafic problem here. Because that's not what we should be spending our times yapping about a story that happened in some shul. Oh, how terrible, and such a juicy piece of mikvah. And the whole concept of a juicy piece of mikvah is kind of like, it's kind of hair-raising. Okay, hold on a second. I've got another glitch going on here. I have no idea what's going on here. Okay. For people, the YouTube live stream fell over, and I'm just restarting that. Okay. Okay. Let me just pass this along to a few people, and okay. Okay, I have no idea what happened to YouTube live stream. I'm going to probably have to wind up reposting it. In any case, the point I'm making here is the concept, the deal, the concept, okay, is the concept is that, again, this has to be something. One of the really, really big problems, aside from CS, is simply the ease with which you can spread and say things that are so inappropriate, so improper without thinking about it. And it has to be the kind of thing we have to get ourselves into such a mode that we think twice and three times before we say something, to counteract how easy it is to say things that we shouldn't. And again, and also as part of when I was talking about the Frumkeit first, the Frumkeit first issue, what basically needs to happen is, when we set ourselves up, again, who we listen to, what we listen to, how we set up our social media accounts to give us a chance to think, etc. But all that will only work if in the first place we are thinking about the issue of who we say things to and what we say to them and why. Okay. The last piece is the concept of Shmir Sanayim. And Shmir Sanayim, it's easy to make fun of it, etc. But again, especially if you go back at the broader concept of making Gedarim for yourself, and it goes back to the idea of, thinking about this in the first place. It's not just, okay, I see this picture, I'm going to turn it away. I'm not going to look at it because it's not sneistic, it's crude, it's this, it's that, whatever. I'm listening, I turn on this piece of music, it sounds terrible, it's gaish, whatever, I'm going to turn it off. But in the first place, how do I minimize the chances that I am going to see things that I should not? And by the way, there are a lot of tools to help you with these things. Obviously, it's also a matter of making rules for yourself and a matter of, there are a lot of tools, but the first thing is making rules for yourself, not just in how you use the technology, but which is the second piece, but the first piece, remembering the Gedarim. It is my job to set myself up to avoid, to the extent possible, things that I shouldn't see, like, you don't go to a beach. So don't go to the online equivalent of a beach, right? Et cetera, et cetera. But again, this is something that you have to think about. In other words, it's not just that you teach your kids you don't go to the beach, but you don't go to places where you really have a hard time avoiding seeing things that you shouldn't. I know people who avoid going to certain areas of Manhattan because, there's almost no chance you're going to not see things that are really, problematic. A number of years ago, I was having this conversation with my sons about, getting suits for Yom Tov, and I basically said to them, I know that this big store is having sales and it'll save us a lot of money, but I'm going to ask you to go not there and go to some other stores in Borough Park and Flatbush, whatever. And the reason, even though it's going to cost a significant amount more, Baruch Hashem, I can afford to do that. But the reason was because these department stores are not set up for somebody who's thinking about, Shmir Sanayim, or, not seeing or hearing the things that they shouldn't see or hear. And by the same token, when you get online, when you set yourself up, this has to be top of mind. How do I shop? Where do I shop? What programs, what social media do I use, etc. These are just the things that you need to have in order to, again, all the technical tools that I will be talking about. Next week, I'm going to be talking about like the pragmatics of how you set yourself up. And then I'm going to be talking about the actual technology tools. None of that matters if you don't, in the first place, think about if well, I'm not going to say none of that matters, because even if you just kind of pop up, but fundamentally, you need to have, these are the things you need to be concerned about when you set yourself up, so that you put yourself in the best position to not stumble into something that you really, really shouldn't be having. So that really covers us for this evening. Does anybody have any questions? Okay. Okay. So if there are no questions, I'm going to just run through kind of a quick recap of what I was talking about, pulling it all together. And next week, obviously, we will not be doing another session because it's Shavuos, but we will continue our next session in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks from today, and I will be talking about how you set up your technology, again, for best results. And after that, we'll talk about the specific tools. So again, in general, from the chinuch, so to speak, or behavioral point of view, we need to have a mindset that puts ruchnius, our frumkeit, our halach at the forefront of anything we plan, and that then carries through in how we do technology. Because remember, technology is not separate from the rest of our lives. So we need to get ourselves into that habit of always thinking in those terms, and then it becomes much easier to think in those terms when we're dealing with the technology. A few core areas that we need to really be very strong on, because those are areas that technology presents the most challenges, are tznius, not just in, like I said, the specifics of how people dress, but in what we share, how we share, who we follow, what we look at, and what we open others up to. The idea of impulse control, of thinking through Einav Bereshis, realizing the consequences of what it is. If I do X, this is what's likely to happen. Okay. Shmiras HaLashon. And, and by the way, I was talking about, Lashon Hara and Chilus, but as well, people will sometimes say the cruelest things that just don't think, like we talk about children, and so on. This is something that we really need to very be careful that just because it's online doesn't mean it's okay to say that, because behind the screen, like you see me, but you think, oh, it's just a picture. But no, there's a person, there's me behind it. And you are sitting behind your screen, you feel like you have armor because who can see you? You're behind the screen. But if somebody were to say something to you, all of the armor, that screen isn't really going to make you feel any better. And it's true for the person you're talking to. So this is really, really important. And then there's, again, the concept of Shmiras Hanayim, making Gedurim for yourself about what you look at, where you go, thinking about, are these things I should be looking to? And also, not just what you look at, but what you listen to, but are these places I should be? Are these places that are going to throw impressions at me that I really don't need to collect in my head, in my mind, in my heart, or not? And when you take that as a package, it really is, I think, dealing with most of the really big challenges that technology, specifically, that technology in specific faces us with. And let me see if there are any questions here. Nope, no questions. And I see no questions here. Okay, in 2 weeks from today, same time, 8:30, there will be the next session, and I will be covering how you set yourself up with your technology in general so that you can, be in a good place, and how once you set up in your mindset and your framework of the technology, it will be easier to make the right technology choices to use the right tools. It'll help you choose the correct tools that will give you the most, protection for your situation.